Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pells.
And I'm Ruth Lorensson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started. So we are continuing our conversation, Tom, about rational intimacy. And you know what we've been trying to do over these past few episodes is just to look at those different stages of rational intimacy. And I think the last episode we talked through devotion.
Yes.
And it really is this kind of platform for envisioning. And so do you want to kick us off? Tell us a little bit about envisioning, what it is, and then I know we're going to talk about fantasizing too, which sounds like a really exciting word, but it's very detrimental. Mm-hmm. But it really is the opposite of envisioning. So I'm going to throw it over to you. Start us off, and then I'll interject as we go.
The premise in this is it is about rational intimacy, as opposed to the kind of intimacy that happens with a tsunami of stress. That's very intimate. And there is relationship that reflects that tsunami of stress. It starts off with a sense of stress and need that the person is experiencing. And then pursuing relationship to meet that need, to deal with and relieve that stress. Except that may happen for a while, but if you're looking to someone else or something else to deal with your stress and need, you're not dealing with it yourself.
So that's the first part of everything, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's always stress and need. Now, how am I going about meeting that? How am I dealing with that? I can do that in a detrimental way that's this escalation of flight or fight, and entering relationship and intimacy to meet need, to relieve stress. Eventually, that gives way because it isn't actually addressing it, and then the stress becomes distress in the relationship. And the need becomes a sense of discontent. And now one or the other or both are not happy campers in the relationship. And this is not rational intimacy.
Yeah.
And then that escalates into avoidance and evasion. And that can be pretending everything is fine, preserving the status quo, being nice or whatever it is, but never talking about, never dealing with those fundamental difficulties that happen in any relationship because it's two human beings together. And you put two human beings together, you got two human beings together, and humans have issues.
And I guess each one of them will have their own triggers for different things. So,
yep.
What one thing that would set one of them off won't be that the same for the other. So, yeah.
But it's that avoidance and evasion. It's like kids in parallel play. They're not playing together. They're existing together. They're living together, but they aren't together. And then eventually the friction continues to build and build in this irrational intimacy of the tsunami of stress. And then there's resistance. I don't want to deal with that. Defiance. I'm not going to deal with that. And now I'm angry. And the angry can show up in all sorts of different ways. And then not assertive. Passive, aggressive, passive aggressive. And at that point, in the tsunami of stress is when the fantasy happens. I just want to feel good. What will make me feel good?
So it's linked to the maladaptive ways of coping.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what the fantasy is. It's projecting this image of look at how happy our home is, or how successful we are, or we've got it all together, or whatever it is. But it's just a fantasy. And the deeper that goes and the longer that goes on, the bigger the fantasy grows. because it has to, because of not dealing with those other ugly, nasty, difficult kinds of dynamics and things, not speaking the truth in love to each other. The fantasy has to just continue to grow and grow and grow, because you just have to keep feeling better and better and better.
So the avoidance and isolation is like the precursor, really, because actually, if you acknowledged the reality and didn't avoid, then you probably wouldn't fall into that fantasy mode.
No, because the resistance and the defiance and the anger and the not being assertive wouldn't happen, because don't tell me about that. I don't want to hear about that. And so there would be no need for the fantasy. Rational intimacy deals with the stress and the need, acknowledges it, is aware of it, doesn't pretend, doesn't sweep it out under the rug, or worse, just kick the can down the road for another day. Rational intimacy, with a sense of contentment, invests, works at finding ways to manage the stress to the degree that that's possible, and perceives the stress as manageable. That's why it's rational intimacy. It perceives the stress as manageable, because stress is manageable to some degree. Completely? Maybe, maybe not. In this moment? Maybe, maybe not, but in another moment, with these resources lacking, but I find these resources, now it's manageable. But it's problem solving, where the other is just problem creating. And so the stress and need is there, but there's this sense of contentment. Yeah, this is stressful. Yes, there's need, but that doesn't mean I have to be upset about it. It doesn't mean I have to be discontent. I can be content. And then that contentment reinforces a sense of feeling secure and capable. Because the more we are not content when stress and need happen, the more insecure and incapable we perceive ourselves and feel ourselves to be, when that's not even necessarily the way it has to be or can be. And maybe that involves being in conversation or therapy or getting help or support or dealing with things or whatever it is. But there's that sense of contentment. And then out of that sense of contentment can come gifting, grace. Yes, I'm stressed, but I don't have to lose my mind. And no, I can't do everything, but I can contribute this. And I have this skill and capability. And I have these gifts. I don't have to have all gifts. I can align with and be in relationship with people who do. And then we mutually bring our gifts together. And that's empowering. So we're content. We feel empowered. And then we engage. We don't withdraw. We don't isolate. We don't avoid. We get into it. We deal with it. We stay present. And we stay in this present moment. That may be comfortable. That may not be comfortable. But it's not whether it's comfortable or uncomfortable.
Do you think that's a real key to rational intimacy?
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's almost like, to me, when you describe it that way, I feel like it's almost is the crux of whether it goes back into tsunami mode or you can carry on into, it's like the axis, like, or I don't know. There's probably, the fork in the road moment of, what are you going to do here? Are you going to avoid, or are you going to engage?
Staying present.
Yeah.
Staying engaged.
So can we just talk about that really quickly? And I know that we're going to carry on to envisioning.
Oh, we will, because we're laying the foundation for what envisioning is as opposed to fantasizing.
But I think it's just really important, because I wonder why people, it sounds so simple, stay present and engage as opposed to avoid and isolate. But why? But I would imagine that a lot, maybe the majority of people avoid and isolate.
Absolutely.
So what is it about the engagement and the staying present that is so challenging for people? What do you think?
It's the discomfort.
it just doesn't feel good.
No. And how oriented are we as human beings to comfort and feeling comfortable and avoiding discomfort and perceiving discomfort as bad and there's something wrong?
So it can feel awkward. It can feel like everything's coming up to the surface. It feels like you have to listen to difficult conversations maybe. So it doesn't feel good. That's why we avoid it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if we stay present and we stay in that moment, we can learn. We can grow. We can change. We can adapt. But it's that staying present, whether I'm comfortable or uncomfortable, isn't relevant. Impactful? Yes. Relevant? No. But it's the discomfort, and human beings have, especially in our society, have been taught that discomfort is bad and means something is wrong.
Yeah.
Doesn't.
Mm-hmm. It is like you said in many episodes, I think, the productive pain of...
Exactly why I use that phrase.
So I think we have a tendency... It's good for us to know this because I think there's a tendency in us to avoid and isolate, to run away. There isn't going to be... We're not going to be like, oh yeah, bring it on. I'm really excited about this discomforting conversation I'm about to have. Like, of course we're not going to do that. So it will need it will need us to engage with a choice at that point, which is why I say it's like, It is the access, it's the fork in the road thing, because actually if we don't grab hold of the position we're in at that time and understand that if we rely on our feelings, then we'll probably go right back to the tsunami and go and have a maladaptive way of coping instead of the discomfort, right? So I think it is just that engagement with, okay, this is going to feel not great, but in the long run, it will be it will cultivate rational intimacy.
Yep. So we stay present, we stay in this moment, we stay engaged, because the benefit to that is that now we can be influential. See, because in the tsunami of stress, when we hit that avoidance and evasion, it's about control. And something or someone has control and I lack control.
Yeah.
And that's why we avoid. Because we can't control. And we sense if we can't control, then I'm not safe and this is going to be harmful. No, control's an illusion.
Can I ask a question? Like, I know that, and this is just on the fly here, but I know that a lot of people who've suffered, more significant, maybe childhood trauma or whatever, one of their coping mechanisms from early on is to disassociate.
Yes.
Right? So would you say that that's actually, is like almost a habit that, so when you're a child... A natural coping mechanism to trauma is to disassociate. But if that carries on through adulthood and you're at these points, is it more likely... I'm just thinking about people who have this kind of disassociative behavior, possibly from a trauma,
Absolutely.
Is this a really difficult one to grasp? And how would you... Are there any ways which you can kind of identify yourself disassociating at that point?
If I'm checked out, I'm dissociating to some degree. I'm just not present. That may have been necessary even as a child, because a child doesn't have those skills. But when that becomes something that, no, I am capable, I'm choosing not to because it's easier, that's a different issue. And there is a level of dissociation that is neurobiological, which is why I do AHA.
Yeah.
Because that stress and trauma can be so impactful on the flight or fight mechanism in the sympathetic nervous system that no matter how conscious you choose and want to be present, it just overwhelms that. the mind can't do it. That's a mental health issue,
Yeah.
and that is treatable.
Yeah.
That's why I do AHA.
Mm-hmm.
And then the person can be present, and they don't have to run away.
But even if they haven't had that, there's just a tendency in us.
Absolutely.
Even if, like, you know, so maybe you've
avoid the uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah, so I think that's more of a human nature
Absolutely.
thing rather than a trauma thing.
Yep.
But if you do have the trauma, disassociative,
Get help.
Yeah, get a bit more help, because actually there's still that tendency in you as a human being to not want to engage with more difficult conversations or difficult realities. So, you know, take that layer off of what happened there, and then you're able to kind of deal with being a human being.
Yeah.
You know.
And you learn to appreciate and value speaking the truth in love.
Mm-hmm.
And interact with people who know how to do that and are willing to do that. That's why that's such a critical phrase. The reason that we often avoid and isolate is because it's the truth or love, not the truth spoken in love. A lot of the avoiding and isolating is because it's one or the other.
So do you think that, I know for me, when I think about avoiding and isolating, I think, and again, I think it comes down to a lot of my perceptions. So, or my seemingly rational,
Always.
perceptions. So I feel like if I speak the truth, will I be rejected?
Exactly.
Which is a lovely.
So then I just learned to speak nothing but love.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is what sets us free.
Yeah.
Or there are others who it's all about the truth, because then I don't have to love.
Yeah. And so they don't have to get into
right.
that space.
And I can avoid and isolate by just saying nothing but the truth. And I'm avoiding and isolating from love.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's a good question, really, for people to ask, why am I avoiding? Like, why would I avoid this? Because it might be different for different. It's going to be different for different people because we have different seemingly rational perceptions. Yep. So, but when we identify those things, then I think we've got more chance of going, okay, well, I might get rejected. That could be part of this conversation, but at least I won't live in fantasy. I will live in
and the fantasy of what looks like acceptance.
Exactly.
But there isn't really acceptance. I'm not accepted for
if
who
you're
I
not
really
able
am.
to speak the truth,
right,
out of fear of someone rejecting you, then it's not a real relationship to begin with.
No, and it's not actually acceptance. It's just conditional on if you act this way and do these things, then you're accepted. And if you don't act this way and don't do these things, bye-bye. That's not intimacy. It just looks like it. So then, if you stay connected, you stay present, and you stay engaged, then you have the possibility of being influential in your well-being, in their well-being, in the well-being of the relationship. And you can be influential, and it's not a matter of who controls or who doesn't control. It's about being influential, and then that person can decide what they want to do with it or not do with it. And if it's reciprocated, and to the degree that you stay present, you keep trying to be influential, as there's opportunity, that naturally then is facilitating you being influential in your own relationship with you. And then that devotion, as we talked about in the last episode, that enthusiasm, that love, that loyalty to a commitment or a cause, and you're the cause and you're the person, that's what lays the groundwork, because you have a healthy self-image and a sober self-esteem, and then you can envision possibilities. And you don't want to fantasize. You don't want pretend. You don't want the fantasy. You want to envision, what are the possibilities? And that's the difference between fantasy and envisioning.
Mm-hmm.
Fantasy is not real. It's not realistic. It's not practical. But wouldn't it be nice? And if only.
Mm.
Envisioning is practicable. We
had a conversation earlier, and he said practicable, and I said, "Did you just make up your own word?" Because I've never heard that before.
No.
But it really is a word.
It's a wonderful
Of course, it is a
word
word because it comes from you. But yeah, tell us what that means.
Practicable means that it is something that is able to be done.
Yeah.
And it can be put into practice successfully. That's what practicable is. And envisioning is all about practicable.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not practicable, if it's not able to be done, and it's not able to be put into practice successfully, it's just a fantasy.
Mm.
And fantasies feed self-gratification.
Yeah.
Fantasies feed feeling good.
Mm-hmm.
Envisioning feeds the future. The possibilities. What would be beneficial? How could that look?
Yeah.
Where fantasy is all about gratification, envisioning is all about a sense of satisfaction.
Yeah. So let's just talk a little bit about fantasy, because it's helpful maybe just to give a few examples, because it's a giant word, and it has, I think, there's a phrase, what is it, a life of fantasy or whatever.
Yeah, Fantasy Island. It was a television show.
Yeah, I mean, it's all...
Everything is...
We know, the reason I say this, Tom, is because I think the words can almost feel like not real, which is kind of ironic because it isn't real. But the word itself can feel like, I'm fantasizing about this and fantasizing about that. But I want us to give some examples because it actually is very tangible what we end up doing. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it is a very real, even though it's not real, it's a very fantasizing, is a very real part of what we end up doing as humans in that place where we've got a choice to either kind of be present or not. And when we don't decide to do that, we end up by default being in this more fantasizing world. But it's not just like I'm fantasizing that, these big grand fairy tale lifestyles. It can be fantasizing literally about a job, or like, that's what I'm saying. It's like it can actually be more real and part of smaller things that we're kind of So can you just give us a few examples of what that would look like?
Fantasy.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. It could be it's an imaginative story. It would be, wouldn't it be great if, and if only if. People pleasing. It's a fantasy.
To hope that you're basically, you're pleasing people in hope that they will be in relationship with you.
And they'll reward you, they'll accept you, they'll admire you, they'll approve of you. And the price of that is to please them. And to be pleasing to them. And don't be displeasing. Don't do that. That's a fantasy. Why? Because it's not practicable. It's not realistic. It's not a reality. You could be the nicest, most wonderful person on the planet, and somebody's going to hate you. Somebody's going to dislike you. They may dislike you because you're likable, and people really like you, and they may hate you for that.
Yeah.
They may hate you for being popular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, we were talking
It's the
about
whole premise of trolls.
Mm-hmm.
Hating on people.
Mm-hmm.
For why? Just to do it.
We were also talking about just we were talking like another example of fantasizing is in terms of the whole of humanity is the sustainability of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so this is why I wanted to just expand this whole thing, because I think when we talk about fantasizing, we can have a very
environment
limited,
we live in, whether that's the micro environment of ourself in a relationship with ourselves, or a friendship, or an intimate relationship, or our existence on this planet. And an example macro level is sustainability. It's a fantasy to think that we can exploit all the resources and do all these terrible things that pollute the environment, and there's not going to be implications for that. That's a fantasy.
Yeah.
We can have it all and consume it all, and there's no price to pay for that?
So in some ways, in lots of ways, the whole American dream is a fantasy. That whole, we can have whatever we want and consume whatever we want without thinking about future generations, without thinking about the rest of the world, without thinking, as long as it's not in our backyard, we're fine. That is not reality.
Right. And there's a difference between the American dream and being aspirational.
Yes.
We can aspire to things.
See, this is why
that's the difference between fantasy and envisioning. Envisioning is aspirational.
Yeah, and this is really important, because earlier in our pre-conversation, we always have pre-conversations to our conversations here. But we talked about, I was like, well, what's the difference? Because actually, what's the difference between the desire of something? And so I love that word aspirational, Tom, and it's important because actually there is a fine line. It's not that the aspiration of, some of the aspirations of the American dream, for example, can be very good and attainable, right? But it's like, I think it's just kind of buying into something that's not real, that will, that is not sustainable for long term,
I just did an internet search. I was going to use a word, but I'm not going to use that word. Anyway, I just did an internet search of the American dream. Here's what it is. Anyone can succeed. Success comes with hard work. It's about upward mobility, owning your own house, the white picket fence, starting a family, starting a business, owning a car, and I think the list definitely goes on and on and on. And equality and meritocracy and freedom and all the rest of that. Sure. But maybe that's not your dream. Maybe that's not envisioning for you. Maybe having your own home and upward mobility to you is just consuming resources. And why do I want to have more and more and more and consuming? And a lot of that is just sold. And the American dream of, I can be anything. Anyone can succeed. Well, what's the definition of success?
Yeah.
And what's my definition of success? What would allow me to have that sense of, I am successful, I am content, I've aspired, I have grown, I have learned, I have loved.
It reminds me, Tom, about the story that you shared very early on about climbing, I think, one of those 14ers with your nephew.
Yes.
And the summiting. And it's the same sort of dynamic of, if we think success is the summit,
is the pinnacle, is being on top,
then there's going to be a lot of
charge.
people feeling very dissatisfied. Whereas if success is where, that story that you shared, if you hadn't listened to it, it's like right back in season 1. But I remember you said that where you ended up with your nephew, that's where you summited.
That's as far as he could get up the mountain.
And that was the summit.
And that was summiting.
Yeah. And that was success in that space. And so instead of this success being this macro idea for all of us to achieve this one thing, and being able to envision our own lives and what would be satisfying and what would be successful for us is more like that dynamic.
Mm-hmm. There are people who have achieved and gained everything, and they're the most miserable people on the planet, but they have everything. Did they succeed? What are you measuring? Well-being? Now you're talking my language. Well-being. Yeah. Sold this, have everything, and all the rest of that. Yeah. It's not the point. And envisioning is practicable. It's realistic. It sees opportunities and possibilities. And then does the hard work and invests and commits, deals with the truth, deals with that lovingly. And it's beneficial to yourself. It's beneficial for others. And it promotes well-being. That to me is success.
And one of the things that I think is important to know is that it's almost, we've talked, and this is why we've gone through the stages, but it's almost impossible to do envisioning without that foundation of the rest.
You won't, because you don't have the foundation to do it. You don't have a sense of being secure and capable. That doesn't mean no sense, no need, or no stress, no need. It just means you feel secure and capable to deal with that. And if you're not empowered, you want to fantasize. You want the fantasy to compensate for feeling not empowered, to substitute for that.
Yeah.
But if you are empowered and you feel secure and capable, and you're influential in beneficial ways, promoting your well-being of others, then you're going to have naturally that sense of devotion to you and your well-being, and wait for it, love, loyalty, fidelity. You're all about you and your well-being. And so then you naturally want to envision, how can that happen? How can I live that out? And then, because it is realistic, because it is practicable, yeah, you can step into that. But I just foreshadowed the next stage.
You're getting ahead of ourselves. But yeah, and we'll look forward to talking about that next stage. But I think, yeah, there is... So I think the real lesson here is that there is a way of envisioning, there is a way of looking to the future with aspiration and desire and hope without it being a fantasy. I think that's the key, and it needs it needs the security, it needs the devotion to yourself. It needs to have those things as foundations in order for you to do that. But that's an incredibly positive, life-giving way to live when you can actually do that. So, well, I'm looking forward to the next conversation. Thank you for sharing those things with us. And I think for our listeners, I would encourage you guys just to think through some of those things that we've talked about. You know, why did we avoid painful conversations or being present? What are the things that we're fearful about? And are we really fantasizing about something? Is it just self-gratifying? Is it just something that's not really based in reality? And there is another alternative here in rational intimacy, which is envisioning. So
when I'm thinking of the future, am I fantasizing about what would just make me feel good? Or am I envisioning something that would be very satisfying and in the short run may or may not feel good, but it's satisfying and it promotes mutual well-being? That's all the difference between
the two.
Yep. Because the one is about satisfaction and the other is just gratification.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website, innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.